Well, thank you. I was curious if you were going to throw out some other credentials. I have not written a book or started a worldwide organization. So we'll get into it. Again, this is called Generosity and Simplicity. I think it was going to be the anchor of the seminars, but we got Tatum next week. And we're going to dive in. Again, I'm going to share a little bit about myself. We'll get into the overview, but let's go for it for the next slide. Can I do a little intro? So again, who am I? Qualifications. Not a lot of qualifications, but that's a picture of my lovely family. As you can see, there's 3 little ones. Our youngest is actually in the back, so I'll be quiet, try to not wake him up. That's Jude. Our middle child, Eleanor, is her arms around my neck, and then our oldest is Maeve. I'm also a middle child, so now that Eleanor is, I'm excited. I'm not excited. I'm ready to be there for her as a middle child as well. There's a lot that comes with that. And then I think one thing, though, as we talk about kind of what qualifies or why should I be on stage, there's actually not too many things, but I think one thing that I can do better than anyone on church staff is not bring a dualistic nature to this conversation. And we'll touch on this a little bit later, but the simple thing is I don't get paid by how much you give SLO City. There's no commission checks. It's not 10% off the top of increases of tithes after this week. Sorry, that wasn't supposed to say that. No. No, but I hope that helps bring apprehension down. Generosity and giving of money in general is a tough topic in the U.S. and in the church. So thank you for coming. Honored to be here, and hopefully we can have a transparent and vulnerable and brave conversation. So part of also being a dad is there's so many good things, but I will say there's one thing that bothers me a little bit, is it limits your choice of car. And if you know me, I love cars. Actually, as a child, I wanted to be a dentist because my dentist had my dream car, which was in 1987. His was cherry red. I would like it in white. Porsche 911 Turbo. Beautiful, beautiful car, only 2 back seats, and I have 3 kids. So it is no longer a family car. But if you've ever been to my garage and seen my office, there's actually a white Porsche on the wall. It's made of Legos. My wife got it for me for Valentine's Day. She's the best. I feel terrible. I didn't introduce her. She's in the back. That's Bianca. Quick round of applause for Bianca. So she gave that to me, and as she handed me the box, she said, "Here's the only Porsche you'll ever own." It's a little cold, but the story goes further back. She knew the whole thing about the dentist and whatnot. And so, again, I was in 3rd grade thinking about a stable career in healthcare so I could have money. So that's like probably the main qualification that I've got is I'm a greedy person, and I'm trying to work through this. And so that's what I want to share as well. It's not deep. It's not a decade worth of work. We've only been on this journey for maybe 18 months. With a lot of the content that we'll kind of go through tonight. But I'm just a few steps ahead. So I hope, again, that also makes this maybe feel a little more attainable. And it kind of just shares a little bit of where I'm coming from as well. Again, it also, I'm sure there are more generous people probably in the crowd, better speakers, people who have more experience. But again, I hope to share with Tanner, who's got some thoughts over there as well, just a little bit of our journey. One other thing I will say, again, from the dualistic standpoint in SLO City Church, I don't want this to take away at all from my trust in them. I give to SLO City, and I'll let that sidebar be over, but yes, again, as we're talking about, I don't want you all to be nervous or maybe, again, it can feel odd, especially I think for like Brent or somebody who, when they speak about generosity, to feel like they're asking you for money for a new building or something. We do need help with the building. All right, so from the beginning, I was thinking about this and how to start things off. We can probably go to the next slide real quick. So again, we're going to talk about our cultural context. Again, I want to make sure that we're well aware of where we're all coming from. We're not blank slates. We live in the United States, and we love money in general. And we're going to talk about how much Jesus talks about money and who he talks about money to and how he talks about it. and then share a little bit more of my story, especially over the last 18 months, just areas where we've been challenged and taken steps. And then we'll talk about practical steps as well. And then throughout this, we'll pause, I think, 3 times for questions at the table for you all to discuss with the community around you. So, go to the next slide. So a couple things about living in the United States. Some of these probably feel very obvious to you, so I got some images up there. First is we are, as a culture, I think very focused on money. One of the pieces of evidence I put up there is the New York Stock Exchange. Does anybody know official holidays? They're bank holidays, right? So we only get to take days off if we're not making money. Also, I think about the US, the national pastime officially, does anybody know? Which sport would be considered the national? Or paying as few taxes as possible. I feel like that would actually unify us more than baseball. I mean, baseball has been fun, but I would say that you get more people around a table and talk about how to save money on taxes, and both sides. It's a purple topic. But the problem that the United States has, and I think this is a fundamental piece, is that for a country that claims for every man has the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, we've messed up, we've kind of missed our way in terms of what equals happiness. See, I think the United States is very focused on more money, more houses, more rooms equals more happiness. And that's, honestly, it's not the case. There's evidence that goes against this on many fronts, and yet we still live, and I think the culture will tell us, if you want to be happy, make more money, buy another car, the Porsche. And one other thing. If you have a Porsche, you can be generous. I don't mean to judge, maybe be generous towards me, and we could drive it together. But again, I think about the US, and just the foundation that we're building on as people, as we come to this topic, is not one that's going to be handed to you to be generous. It's going to go the other direction. And again, I think you'll be praised more than critiqued if you're keeping money for yourself and building up large retirement funds. So I'm going to try to skip a rock through some of the resources that have been helpful for us as well. Sorry, not quite yet, but we'll move on here in a second. So a few things on that misconception that more money equals more happiness. First, studies have actually found that there's a plateau. About $75,000 to $100,000 of kind of income, and beyond that, more money does not equal more happiness, and a lot of times it actually reduces the happiness per person. So again, that is very different based on different places in the United States and whatnot. We know that there's cultural context you'd have to take, but generally speaking, once the basic needs are met, more money does not mean more happiness. There is a quote, I think it's on the next slide. This is probably way too small for you to see, but I'll read it real quick. There's a sociologist, Hilary Davidson, and Christian Smith, in their book, The Paradox of Generosity, says, people rightly say money cannot buy happiness, but money and happiness are still related in a curious way. Happiness can be the result not of spending more money on oneself, but rather giving money away to others. The data examined here shows that this is not simply a nice idea, but a social scientific fact. So that kind of hits the core of the American dream. And it really doesn't work. And there's, again, more data and more topics that we're not going to go through right now, but it's tough for us in the US that is, again, telling us to consume, to get deep as well, and then to start to live into this of how do we give money away. The other thing that the United States, I would say, is actually, and studies show this as well, is we're more secretive about money than a lot of the countries that we would compare to. So we're happy to talk about somebody else's house, or probably talk about what car they drive without them in there, but to actually have conversations about what we do with our money with specifics is pretty rare, especially in detail. I think there's a piece of it is where it's tied to your identity, of what you spend your money on or what you spend your time on says a lot about who you are. And so a lot of us, I would kind of joke about this at work, we will not show our email or our bank account to pretty much anybody. I think even times spouses have separate bank accounts or whatnot. Like it's a very secretive topic, which again is one of the headwinds that we're up against with this topic. The other thing, and this is with the church, is in Matthew 6, is not only, again, there's secretive in the United States about money. We're scared to share anything. And generally speaking, we are told to have more and to accumulate more. And then in the church, in terms of generosity, Matthew 6, 1 through 3, I'm going to read this again. I did a terrible job on these slides. Can you guys read it? Thank you. I should have just turned it on. All right, it says, "Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets to be honored by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you." So my research on this topic, and this is a tough one for us, because we want to give and then we don't want to say anything about it, give in secret, just put it in an envelope and slide it across the table. But I think what this topic is actually this passage is around the heart. Because generosity is not just money, right? It's going to be your time and your talents as well. And so if we're talking about we need to be secret about all generosity, then the hope for one is a big problem. Like, we should not be doing that together. And that doesn't make sense. It doesn't pencil out. So reading this has a lot more to do, again, it says they do it to be honored by others. So I think there's a piece of this in the church that we need to rewrite, being secretive about being generous versus being humble while being generous as well. So that's I think, again, three major things. And then another, just a little bit before that, Matthew 5:14, it says, "You are a light on the hill of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under the bowl. Instead, they put it on a stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." So that kind of would contradict. If we're supposed to do generosity in secret, how are we going to put our good deeds in, like, as a lamp on a stand or a city on a hill? So it has to apply to finances as well. And so those are, I think, three things that we need to start to, again, realize that typically in the church, we're taught about secrecy. The United States is going to tell you to get more stuff and not tell about your finances in general. And then lastly, there's this problem of consumerism in the United States as well. So not just having more in your bank account, but having the newest thing, having more. This, I think, I didn't realize how much this impacted me. We'll get into this a little bit more, but I think we not only buy a lot, but we spend a lot of time working on researching, figuring out what to buy. We spend time organizing our closets as well. So this consumerism is just widespread across kind of the impact of our lives. And the last thing, I think Andy Crouch articulates this really well, is this desire is not just a United States problem, but it's a human problem. It kind of goes all the way back to the garden of Adam and Eve desiring abundance without dependence. And we'll get into this a little bit more in terms of what Jesus says on this topic, but it's, I think, a good thing to call out. They're looking for the garden, for the knowledge of good and evil, but without God. They wanted to be their own gods. And I think that's a piece of what fuels that desire for more, especially in my heart, was this desire to be able to control my time, to control security, to control safety, and feeling like I could control that through money. I think that is a part of this kind of base foundation that we're probably all born with. Again, not just a United States thing, but a human thing. So that's kind of our real upper. To start off the topic of we're all probably set up not to succeed in the topic of generosity. And so I'm going to pause for a second. We've got the first section of questions, which you can talk about at your tables. We'll probably have about 10 minutes just to kind of start to unpack some of those ideas. If it's something you've been thinking about, that's awesome. If it's brand new, but I'm just going to pause. There's 3 questions up there, so feel free to dig in and discuss. And if any table would like to share something that came up at their table afterwards, that would be amazing. Well, thank you. We're going to jump in, kind of turn a little bit away from what the United States and our culture says about money, maybe our childhood, and talk more about what Jesus says about money. He spoke a lot about this, but his followers were mostly poor, which I think is an interesting thing to think about. So he wasn't talking to a bunch of rich people, though he did. And so we're going to talk about, again, a lot of Jesus' teachings, and we're going to talk about one specifically around that bigger barn. So Brent, I think you mentioned this a few months ago at this point in a sermon on money, that roughly, I think 25% of the teachings, maybe 30% of the parables of Jesus are about money. He cautions about greed. He cautions not to be seduced by it, not to trust it. And again, so it's clear that the love of money has a very prominent spot in Jesus' teaching. And again, we don't see a lot of sermons on it. It's not a popular topic to talk about, but definitely one that is near and dear, and Jesus thought was important for his followers. Some of his most scathing critiques as well were people who followed the law and tithed to an absurd amount in accuracy. During that time, a full tithe, roughly speaking, is about 23%, not 10%. And Jesus doesn't talk a lot about tithe, if at all. He almost at times seemed apathetic, especially towards taxes. To give to Caesar what is Caesar's, but talks a lot about generosity. So we're going to also talk about the difference between those two. One of his teachings, and this has been core to our journey, is about building bigger barns. Bianca and I were talking about it this morning, of like, how did we miss this growing up? It's right there in the Gospels. So we'll go to Luke 12, 16 through 21. And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. And then he said, this is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones. There I will store my surplus grain, and I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded of you, and who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be for whoever stores things up for themselves, but is not rich towards God. It's blunt, to the point. One of the books that we really enjoyed on this topic is God and Money. It's by two Harvard Business School graduates, and they rewrite that entire section in kind of modern times. So I want to read that really quick as well. The stock options belonging to a manager vested in a major run-up in their share price. He thought to himself, what shall I do? I have already saved enough to send my kids to college, my house is paid off, and I already max out my 401k every year. He said, I will do this. I will open an investment account and create passive income portfolio, and I'll exercise my options and put my money there. And I will say to myself, you have a big enough portfolio to be financially independent, retire early, plan some vacations, and play golf. You chuckle. It might be an uncomfortable chuckle, as it was for me, because I love golf. And I love Harvard, and it struck me deep, and I revolted against that, because that is what I'm going through. I kid you not, people have asked, what are you going to do when you retire? I was like, I'm never going to retire, but I'm going to work at SLO Country Club as a greenskeeper so I can get free golf. It was frustrating to read it because it was so true, and we don't know each other. So it's clear, again, that Jesus talks about the good life, and it's not through accumulation of wealth. And yet it's so hard to live in a way that shows we truly believe that. Again, in Matthew 6, on the Sermon on the Mount, with an audience, again, that is not very wealthy people, there's another very stern warning from Jesus, which says this. There you go. Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourself treasure in heaven, where neither moth or rust destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The eye is the lamp of the body. So if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? No one can serve two masters, for either you will hate one and love the other, or will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. At first reading, this seems a little bit odd. We talked about it on our Wednesday morning Bible study, and if you go, I see you. Well done. But we were talking about this, and it's like Jesus is talking about money, and then he talks about getting an eye check, and then he goes back to money. But it's much deeper than that. And as we talked about a little bit earlier in terms of abundance and dependence, this kind of strikes that same chord. So he's talking about money, and he's talking about a good eye. At that time, having a good eye was having a view of God as an abundant giver, an abundant God who's generous and supplies daily bread. Where a bad eye is a scarcity mindset, one where God is not a generous provider, so therefore your eye would be dark or be bad. So you can kind of see it actually connects those two things really well about trusting God. Again, do not lay up not laying up treasures for yourself because you know that he is an abundant God. Skip down a little bit. So you see, again, it carries a lot of weight. I don't want to pause for table questions, but again, before going into this, as I read these teachings for a long time, it was kind of like they didn't count. I wanted to be the exception to the rule. I figured I'm pretty good at multitasking, I can handle two masters, which is just, it's not the case. Or I want to build a big enough barn that I feel comfortable, but not to where I get judged. I want to have a barn that where I can park my Porsche in, But again, you talk about Jesus' warning about it's harder for a rich man to get into heaven than for a camel to get through the eye of a needle. But maybe that could be me. And that's how I lived. I was very proud of maxing out my 401k. And now I'm all torn up about it. But I think that's a lot of how we live, as if we're going to find the good life and edit Jesus' teaching, especially one that he's talking about 25% of the time. It's not just a one-off that's tough to interpret. It's everywhere that he's talking about money. And so it's plain as day, but it's still really hard. And it's hard on a daily basis. I talk about daily bread, and I think about that for me as just being content. And sometimes it's going to just be painful. I promise you, I'm not making this up, on the drive over, a gold Porsche drove past. And I was like, you are kidding me. So it's always there. But I think God wants to meet us in that. Kind of in that pain is where he shows up. So it's not, I think there's a piece of this topic about generosity and going without or fasting is that moment where you're creating space. You're going without and letting Jesus fill in the gaps. And it's an easy yoke. I don't know if it's just me, but being independent is tiring. I joked about Eleanor being a middle kid, but I think some of that psyche for me is just feeling like God gave me bread 10 years ago, and I have to make it last. So we're going to go to the questions. Oh, goodness. I messed this one up. Oh, gosh. Sorry. I don't know where I'm at. Mammon. Here we go. Thank you. I don't know why. All right. There's one other piece on that I want to go back to as well, in terms of when Jesus says mammon, and it is described in the Gospels, they don't translate it to Greek. They leave it as the word mammon, which is, again, they talk about an entity that promises wealth with the greedy pursuit of gain, but it has more of like a demonic translation, I guess, or vibe. It's an Aramaic word that I think it means like a little god, like lowercase g. I think it means a lot that Jesus uses the word, and then the disciples who wrote it down didn't translate it, or they left it in, because I think there's a huge part of a huge part of it where it is, again, it's not multitasking. It's another God that's taking God's place, and it doesn't give peace. And I think we need to take it with that level of seriousness. That it's not, the difference between one index fund and another, but it truly is the difference between experiencing God's provision now or having to wait till we get to heaven. So, all right, let's go to questions number 2. I'm going to try to pull it together. All right, so a few more. I'm going to talk about, the Jesus is teaching, what that says, how what you have been taught on tithing, it can be the difference between, again, tithing versus generosity, and then I'll let you guys kind of discuss as well around what has that been like for you of reading Jesus' teaching and kind of squaring that with the way that you live. I think a part of that, to answer Brent's question right out of the gate of where is this emotion coming from, trying to articulate this, I didn't see that one coming, but I have, if anybody's familiar with Myers-Briggs or the strength assessment, my 1-2 is responsibility and achiever. So it's hard for me to trust anybody. And I think there's been so much, even as I was preparing for this and talking to some friends who were praying for me this morning, I want to trust what I know and not trust God with any category in general. It's just not, it doesn't feel natural. And I think that part of where that emotion comes from is feeling free of the need to be responsible. Not to waste money, but to feel like I have to have everything accounted for and then remove my need to pray. As you point out, Dan, like that goal for me was almost like I looked at God's blessing bank account as like, well, he only has a little bit to give to some people. I'll be good on my own. I'll see you at the finish line, which is silly. Like that's not the case, but that's the mindset that I was bringing in even 12 months ago and trying to unpack. So that's kind of, again, a little bit, this is where I would say the journey of generosity started for us, was about 18 to 24 months ago. I say us, this has been one for Bianca and I together, shared bank account. I could not have done this or would not be on the stage without her as both a thought partner and somebody who is taking risks with me in terms of generosity. So she's the better half, the brains of the operation for sure. And in this all started, we listened to a sermon from a church up in Oregon called Bridgetown, and there was a sermon on the rich young ruler, and where that kind of landed, I think to your point about a lot of Americans are thinking about what second car to buy. So it's a unique place, but it puts us in this position of we are the rich young ruler. Again, speaking the we as in Bianca and I, that's where it hit us of like, oh, we always viewed this as somebody else. This is the CEO, this is the people with extra beach houses and whatnot. But especially compared to the global standard, we're way above. We're royalty in any other time frame, any other country. And that kind of started to plant this seed, and it seemed like every podcast that we listened to was about generosity. But we're doing a 4-part sermon or series on generosity, or here's another book on generosity, or a podcast with the authors of the book on generosity. And then Brent's preaching on generosity. It's like we couldn't escape this. And it felt like God was helping guide us, maybe bombarded with the topic, but it was everywhere we turned. And throughout that, like, it started to help us re-look at the tithe. And so I put that question in there for a reason. And I want to follow up kind of what our mindset shifted was, at first it was we give 10% so we can spend the other 90% on whatever we want. It was, here's my monthly dues, and now I'm going to, whether it's a nice vacation or new clothes or Jordan ones in a special colorway, whatever they are, like that was the mindset. I give so I can keep. And what really started to kind of get untangled is, one, that tithe doesn't really actually translate well, especially in this topic of, thank you, of generosity, is we should be asking the question of how much do I need, and then looking to give the rest. And that's a complicated conversation for a lot of us. But that started us on this journey of starting to think about, like, well, how much do we actually need in retirement? How much do we need in terms of the size of our home, or what do our cars look like? And it started to kind of play into all these different topics. And again, we talked about consumerism a little while ago. It started to reshape how I spent my time and attention. I started kind of realizing that, again, like in my closet, it was not, is that a good shirt? Should I buy it and add it to the closet? It was, I have enough shirts. I have plenty of shirts. Again, in the Strength Finders, I've got includer in the top 5. I kid you not, I would wear a shirt to make it feel included. My mom always had this thing, it was the 20 cents rule, is you should use something enough times to where it only costs you 20 cents per use. So I'm doing the math in my head. I'm like, I got to wear this shirt 16 more times to use it up. Like that was going through my head. And now it's starting like, no, just give it to somebody who actually needs it. Give it to an organization that can repurpose it or sell it, and they can give that money to something good, and just have what you need. I remember some of the most peaceful, and this, again, so we're going through this whole thing over the last 18 months, and I started to think back on times in my life where I had felt the most peace and content. One of them, I worked up at Hume Lake. I was there for a year, and our monthly payment was $50 a month. If anybody's heard of the Joshua Wilderness Institute, I did that. It was a lovely time. I highly recommend. Happy to talk about it. But that time was actually very peaceful. I worked 6 days a week, had no money, but didn't need anything. Every meal was covered. I didn't have to think about if coffee was going to be made. And it was one of the moments where I was not responsible for everything in my life. And so trying to think through that, of like, oh, this is more aligned to what God's talking about daily bread. Like, I got to get back to that. And I've actually lost my way over the last decade by trying to control everything. And not just for myself, but also feeling the burden to control it for my family, which again is a noble cause. Like, I'm not saying you shouldn't worry about keeping your family safe, but the weight of having all of that on me and probably undoing it is a lot of where that emotion probably popped up from. So as we started to process this, one of our friends, the Nixons, we were talking about a car purchase, and that led to the topic of generosity and, like, could a car be a bigger barn? Was kind of the topic that really popped up for us. And so we started there, and then we ended up actually talking through finances in specifics. So he's one friend that we've gone line by line. Here's how much we spend on groceries. This is what it looks like for our mortgage. This is how much we spend on eating out. And that level of transparency has also been huge for us to figure out what is stewardship and what is hoarding. Which is, again, it's not easy to do. And I don't know if you've felt siloed in this way, but you're trying to think, like, I don't know what's good. I don't know what's enough. Like, am I giving in a way that's irresponsible? Or is this actually like, no, this is, you've saved plenty. You're going to trust God for income going forward as well, but you should be giving more on top of it. And I just had nowhere to kind of bounce ideas off of. And Adam Nixon was a huge help in that journey. And so we're talking through podcasts together. We're getting deeper and deeper into this, kind of looking at the way we think about tithe, about how much we save and spend, how much we can give to others, and then also trying to think through, like, how do we give in a way that creates tension? And we'll get into this a little bit more in terms of, like, practical steps, but I wanted giving to impact spending, which until very recently, they were two separate things. I could give over here and spend over here, and neither decision impacted the other. And I think it's until recent times for us, is like those start to make a difference. And so it kind of always, I'm like, I could save $50 a month by making coffee at home. And I could give that. I was like, well, it didn't actually mean anything, because my coffee spending habits had no impact. There was margin between still. So that's another piece, is we're trying to lean into, how do we give in a way that we're going to feel? Again, not saying don't plan, not saying don't be irresponsible, but lean into that little scary section a little bit. Again, one of the other big pieces for us is we stopped using I put this image up there, the term net worth. Talk about how much your identity is tied up in your money. I don't think using that term is helpful It's like your personal worth is probably how we interpret that more often than just net worth. So the phrase that we kind of brought into our vernacular is assets under management, which has kind of helped us think of it, and just it's that reminder. And I love practicing the way. I love this series, and I feel like it's a little practice that helps reset the truth about money, that we're not supposed to be barns. Resources aren't supposed to come in and stop. Like, we should be a conduit. We are gonna make it. And this is the part where it's like generosity was a portal to being God's friend, not like a branch that he sent out to go create ROI on their own. And I brought a whole stack, so it should be fine. Oh, gosh. I was trying to explain this and talk it through with Bianca that I don't think I believed God wanted to be my friend. It was more just like we could have our one-on-one meeting every 30 minutes once a month, and he'd check on my metrics. Which, again, I come from corporate America. I work at Stryker. I love Stryker. But it's tough to undo that. And it's not a life of trust. And this is all happening. In this last summer, again, I love Stryker. Been working there for 8 years. But it was a rough summer. There was a season where I did not know if I was going to have a job. I didn't know if I was going to get fired or if I was going to quit or if those were going to probably happen on the same day. And it wasn't, I think I drove up and called a friend. And I wanted to lean on the Holy Spirit. But it didn't feel like I had the right to. We're gonna make it. Does that? It's like, again, I had so much built up in the bank account, and I had so many other plans. I wasn't even treating Jesus like he was the smartest person in the room. It was like, here's actually my backup on backup on backup. And so it kind of started to hit of, like, God gave me the job. He can take it away. I'd probably have an identity crisis, but it was going to be good. And we made it through. Love Stryker. Everything's worked out. Still there. And a few months later, even got a bonus for some of the performance that had happened. Things that were confusing or reasons that I almost wanted to quit got sorted out. And we ended up giving a large portion of the bonus away. And it, again, it's just continuing to try to practice. And it felt like we were getting these baby steps throughout. It's like, hey, we're going to teach you on this. Here's a podcast on this. And then God's given you a chance to work it out as well. And so I move on from Stryker. Sorry, collect my thoughts. So through this year, again, this mindset has been impressed upon us, myself and Bianca, of letting go of the God of mammon, learning to cling to God, moving from the scarcity mindset, which again is deeply ingrained and a heavy yoke to carry, and kind of leaning into the grateful mindset of abundance. And we're just increasingly convinced of his faithfulness. He provides for the birds of the air. He clothes the lilies of the field. He's going to take care of you. He's going to take care of us. And it doesn't, so you never really know. the power that it has, clearly, I did not think I was going to cry today. But I think that's probably maybe the message I want to kind of leave you before we go into one more time of talking, and we'll get also into some practical steps, is I did not realize for 10 years how much this was consuming me. Like, it was every morning. I don't have Twitter. It's never been for me, but I would wake up and check the stock market and check bank accounts. And the weight that I was holding in terms of what jobs I had, or again, how the job and then the income that would come with that was tied into my identity, it's so heavy. And so that's what I want to encourage this group with, is you gotta start somewhere, and you don't know what you're missing out on. Like, there's parts of you that are not alive. We're finite people, and energy and attention is scarce and fragile. And when you spend it worrying and you spend it trying to be your own little God, you're burning up so much.
Preach it, brother.
We're getting there. All right. So I talked as well, like this, I started to see this really also play out in, again, how I spent my time, especially on my phone. Does anybody else have an addiction to their iPhone? I got no hands raised. All right. Again, so I started to watch this, and I've been paying attention even in the last 4 weeks of like, what does this look like and how much time I spend? And it's dramatically reduced. I would spend hours and hours on YouTube just researching trucks and cars, or just devices that maybe someday I might need to buy. And it just lost its pop. And just noticed that this time I almost feel like lost in a good way, because there's time back in the calendar, time to be present with my girls. Is I think it sounds silly, but I would prioritize the new 2024 Tacoma review over playing with them. Again, just so much, like, little moments of life are coming back in, and it's, for me, again, it was so much of it was sparked by starting to give, and then what that did to the rest of my mind and soul. So again, 2024. We've given more. We're not all stars. I think there's amazing people. There's examples in this book of people who have incrementally given, and it's what we're striving to do, is just increase each year. Just add a little bit. Hopefully we get to the point where we're adding a lot more each year in terms of giving. And again, we haven't even hit the 20% mark when you compare what we give to our gross or net income, but it's more. Our bank accounts are a little bit less this year, but the life is so much more full. All right, we're going to get into some practical stuff. So where to start? I think this is the next line. There we go. First off, just respect your foundation. Y'all are starting in a different spot. So each of you has a different upbringing. You've got different teachings. You've got different kind of views on the budget, or how you budget, if you budget at all. But just understand, again, that you are starting in a unique place, and trying to skip ahead is not going to work out well. So understand, I say, first try to figure out where you are. And most people, I kind of put it up there, most people start in one of three spots. They're either spending more than they make, don't recommend. They're spending 100% of what they make, also don't recommend, or they're spending less than what they make, which is where we want to get to. And I put, again, that's under the topic of creating some space to give from. Again, it sounds obvious, but if you don't know if you have the ability to give, it probably means you need to start doing some homework just to figure out your current state. Again, talk to Phil. He'll help you out. And I'm well aware the percentage or the dollar amount I don't think is the important thing. It might be $5, it might be $5,000 a month. I don't know. It might just be time. It might just be showing love to somebody else. So you got to start with where you're at, pray about it, and if it's a little uncomfortable and a little scary, you're probably on the right track. My daughter, Maeve, she's a smart cookie. She was here when we did the meals. What was the 50,000 meals? What called? Yeah, there you go. She was there, and on the way home, she asked, "When are we giving away more meals?" And I was like, I don't know. Like when they plan the next event. And she's like, "Well, I'm pretty sure there's people who need food." I was like, "Yeah." She's like, "What about the people on the intersection?" I was like, "Yeah, they probably do." I'm like, Maeve, you're making me uncomfortable. I was like, let's try to find myself an out. I was like, "We don't know what they need." She's like, "Dad, you should ask them." Goodness. We're getting a lecture from our 5-year-old on the way home. But again, that for me, it's like I'm far more comfortable writing a check and donating to the meals program than I would be to stop and ask somebody's name. And so I think, again, in terms of that, respecting your foundation or even creating something to give, for me, a lot of it was actually creating time, is not being rushed. Another resource I would throw out there is Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by John Mark Comer. He talks about love and hurry don't mix. And so it's going to be different for everybody. I think slowing down, spending less, and looking around is going to be key for everybody. And so I want to talk a little bit about simplicity. It was in the title, so you can't just skip it. One of the ways, again, we talked about reducing hurry, but one of the ways you might need to do that is actually through the practice of simplicity, or some would call it minimalism. I first found this with Maria Kondo and the KonMari method. Anyone familiar? Got a few nods. A little Netflix series. I did it because I like things to be clean. This was before the generosity kind of journey for us. So we leaned into simplicity, started getting rid of things and tidying things. And again, it kind of felt empty. Same way that, again, being frugal without generosity just feels like you're being stingy. But we started to practice things, and it was kind of this foundation that kind of almost went dormant, and then we started to get into generosity. I was like, ooh, this is starting to make more sense. So now I actually practice a few different things. This last year I practiced a corporate America, 3 months, 90 days, where I only buy consumables like gas, food, whatnot. I try to buy nothing new. So just to, again, practice, I think we're going to do it again for Lent this year, where your goal is actually own less things after a 40 or 90-day period. Start giving them away to somebody who needs them. I started using a capsule wardrobe, which is why Brent and I always match with our pants. This is in the capsule wardrobe. I actually had a conversation about this with a friend about buying quality and not buying a lot or quantity. If you think about Jesus's coat, they cast lots for it. It was really nice. The Roman guards wanted it. So he probably practiced a capsule wardrobe as well. He wasn't buying cheap stuff, but he's buying something probably with a lot of thought as well. But what that does do, again, it creates both time for yourself, because you're not consumed shopping, but it also is creating space in your budget as well, something to give from. I kid you not, I counted all of the socks, and I wanted to answer the question for myself, how many pairs of socks is a good number of socks, and lined them up by category. This is a little bit into my brain, but it helped me. Again, answering that question of what is enough, I needed to do that, and it stressed Bianca out, but she's still with me. In the last 50 years, here's this little stat in terms of simplicity. Home sizes have doubled and families have shrunk in half, and yet we still have enough square footage in storage units for every American to have 7 square feet to themselves. It's a lot of space. Then again, in that book, Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, John Mark Comer quotes a French sociologist, Jean B. We're going to stick with that. And she made the point that the Western world materialism has become the new dominant system of meaning. He argues that atheism hasn't replaced cultural Christianity, but shopping has. Simply put, I think simplicity and generosity go hand in hand. Either you might find simplicity and then it creates space to give, or you might start giving and realize you have so much and lean into simplicity to both give more and to create some clarity as well. So the second thing, after you've kind of, again, respect the foundation, you got to create something to give, is align with your passions and trust. I'm going to give a quick plug to Compassion International. There we go. If you don't know, or you don't know where to give, and you're worried about giving to somebody who's not going to use the money well, give to Compassion. They're well vetted. They both have a space where you can give financially, but they have faces. There's a contact piece. You know who you're giving to. You can write birthday cards to the people on the other side. It's again, the guys who wrote the book, God and Money, refer to that as the index fund of generosity. If you don't know where to start, there you go. If you don't know what an index fund is, talk to Phil. If you have an issue giving somewhere, don't also shy away. I'm going to bring up SLO City one more time because I think it's, again, best for me to do this. But if you're like, I don't give to SLO City, I've got trust issues or church hurt or something else, pull on that string. Again, where you start to give your money is going to expose things about your heart. And showing up just as a consumer to a community like this is going to, again, just be surface level. And you're going to pull away a lot of the gifts that you could experience through really diving in. And I think that, again, when you're giving financially, it's going to prompt those questions. So show up to the budget meetings. Ask Brent tough questions about the building. I got one laugh. Thank you. But again, you might not know what wounds you're dealing with. So start giving and start to ask questions. Again, they would probably argue that, I say they, again, this book, God and Money, don't just give probably the way that we did, which was once a month on a recurring basis, a little bit everywhere. We had the diversified portfolio. But what that did, in kind of looking back now, is that pulled us away from the contact points. We weren't invested enough to pray for the people that we were given to. We weren't paying attention, and so that we've actually readjusted and refined down both more specific categories that we're giving to, ones that line up with things that we're really passionate about, and we try to give more one-offs, things that we budget for, but you don't see them coming, and that stings a little bit when you write checks of substantial size. But again, the freedom that comes after that is tough to describe. Third, look for community. I talked about the Nixons being the community for us, and we got community groups I hope to keep going deeper in as well. But this should be something we do together. We think about the early church, they did it together. They were very transparent about this. They were selling what they had, giving to the poor, and it says no one was in need. And I want to go to that next topic as well, proximity to the poor. There's no way that you read Jesus' teaching and don't see God's heart for the poor. I think it's easy. Again, I can find myself wanting to give to people who have a lot to impress them. I want somebody to see the donation. Again, we talked about that. That's where the humility needs to come back in and get me back in check. But that's not, again, when Jesus talks about it, it's giving to the poor. And I think that contact piece for us is where we actually get way more out of being generous than the people that we're giving to. So lean in, find ways to give to people in person. I think, again, I love compassion because there's the person on the other side. I love the one-to-one and the stories that are shared here. Again, there's a contact piece where it is shaping your soul. I think about generosity pulling the rocks out of the soil. I have a spreadsheet that I use, again, with our friends to do this in terms of, I'm backing up one to giving in community. This spreadsheet to go into the planning piece, it's written by two guys who graduated from Harvard, so trusted, vetted sources, but they put a lot of practical steps in place of like how much you should spend on a car, how to buy a house, how to do this in a way, again, it's not building bigger barns. They also have a thing called a salary cap. and we probably think about with NBA teams or, the NFL. But they talk about putting this salary cap on yourself, and they talk about a lot of people who have a net worth or assets under management cap as well, where they know, like they've done the math, we've got plenty. We have more than enough. We're not going to let our assets continue to grow. If it grows more, we're giving the rest away, which is an awesome place to be in, because that's freedom on the other side. And that was super helpful for me, a guy who loves spreadsheets, can get down with Excel if anybody wants a good time. But like I said, put it on paper. It helped me kind of, again, see where I'm not trusting God, but then ask the questions, do the math, vet it with a friend, go through all the different line items of our budget, and then find other places to give. Again, I'm going to keep referencing him. John Mark Comer, New York Times bestselling author, plenty of discretionary income. He shares purchases of $1,000 or more with his community, which again, that just feels so foreign. I feel threatened when somebody asks about the shoes I want to buy next. Again, because I'm worried of judgment. But I think it's an amazing example of how to start doing things in community. You'll probably buy less stuff, which would be good, but also things are going to have more meaning. I think about, again, the story I was sharing about with the Nixons, and they bought a brand new van. And we've prayed about the van and prayed about using that van. And there's so many conversations. It's just a van, but it takes on so much more when it's in that context of generosity as well. Tim Keller said, "We are blessed not to raise our standard of living, but to raise our standard of giving." So again, I mentioned in the church, I think we've misread the secrecy kind of topic about this. I think we need to undo that. I think it's crippling our ability to spur each other on. I think when we start to give in groups, you saw we could do 50,000 meals in a night. We're not worried about doing it with acts of service and giving of our time, but I think a lot of times we're worried about the money. Another great quote from Randy Alcorn, "Money is like sin, it gets more powerful when it's in the dark." I think it actually might be Andy Crouch, but it's just, we've got to get this topic out into the light. So I'm going to pause. I think we've got one more section of questions. We'll break up, and then we will wrap things up. Break.
Feels like 40 years since I saw that burning bush. And even longer still since I felt the heat from that flame. If I'm being honest with you, I sure hoped there'd be a few more of those along the way. But I still believe you're here, even in the waiting. 'Cause after all these years I still love you. After all these years, I'll still praise your holy name. 'Cause even when I've lost my taste for manna, it comes from heaven all the same. Every day, it comes from heaven all the same. It feels like 40 years since I saw you split the sea. And even longer still since you split this heart in me. I don't know why some days I just get so afraid that meeting you was just a dream.
We're gonna go one more minute. These are good questions to take back to your community groups.
After all these years, I still and after all these years, I still praise your holy name. 'Cause even when I've lost my taste for manna, comes from heaven.
All right. We're gonna bring it back. I'm gonna do my best to put a little bow on this, and then we'll open it up for questions and respect all of your time and get you out of here by 8. So as Brent mentioned before, as we were getting up here, we run on Saturday mornings, a little group of us. This is a picture that I took a few weeks ago from the M on Madonna, and it's a lovely time. At about 9 p.m., the text thread starts firing as we start to figure out where we're gonna run. We go on a little 5 to 6 mile loop. Sometimes we get coffee, bring it back to our significant others, and the good conversation can be heard throughout at least the downhills when we're not just trying to breathe. I've fallen in love with Saturday mornings. This is the part that I thought I was going to cry. If you ask any of the guys, they know that there's probably a point near the end where I can't slow down, where I just have to run. It's like the hill wants you. It's okay, Bobby. Yeah. I'm the only one crying in this room. It might be on a ridge with the wind rustling tall grasses and the sun rising on the southeast side of the hill, or a flowing downhill in Irish hills, and I don't know how to describe it. Sorry. Jordan, that was me. It's like Jesus is running with me. It's not a race, it's not to win, just to enjoy time with him in his creation. As if he's saying, I can't read it. I made you, I made this mountain, I know your feet, I know your heartbeat, and I know that this has nothing to do with your bank account, but everything to do with trusting me with it. I've told Bianca, like, every week, I haven't felt like a kid since I was a kid. And it's just so fun. And that's why when Brent would be preaching on this, there'd be times I'm in the back and I just want to stand up and share because I don't want y'all to miss out. I was thinking about it on the way over of, I'm so happy it happened now, and I didn't learn this when I'm much older, because I would have missed on everything, just leaned into hustle culture, just more hours on email and trying to get the next promotion. And I feel like I just got saved from that. So I'm not going to tell you that if you start to give, you're going to end up running with us at 7 a.m. And it probably won't happen. But I do think it's going to broaden your view of life across the board. The early church was marked with radical generosity that messed up the economy. There's Roman historians who reference Christians both mockingly because they were taking care of the poor, which was not culturally normal in the Roman times, and they were bothered because it was messing things up. And that's, when I thought about this talk, that's what I want for SLO City. That the city has to recognize, like, we don't know what to do because this church is changing the dynamics of our city. They're taking care of everyone. We had money budgeted for this, and we don't have to spend it here anymore because SLO City showed up. That's what I want, that we'd be infamous for mediocre coffee, constantly growing out of a building, and a never-ending supply of donuts and radical generosity.